Storm over Warlock by Andre Norton, Chapter 10. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by R.J. Davis. Storm over Warlock by Andre Norton, Chapter 10. A Trap for a Trapper. Shan took the piece of soft chalk-like stone he had found and drew another short white mark on the rust red of a boulder, well above tide level. That made 3 such marks, 3 days since Thorvald had marooned him, and he was no nearer the shore now than he had been on that first morning. He sat where he was by the boulder, aware that he should be up, trying to climb to the less accessible nest of the seabirds. The prisoners, man and wolverines, had cleaned out all those they had discovered on beach and cliffs. But at the thought of more eggs, Shan's stomach knotted in pain, and he began to reach. There had been no sign of Thorvald since Shan had watched him steer between the 2 westward islands, and the younger Terran's faint hope that the officer would return had died. On the shore a few feet away lay his own pitiful attempt to solve the problem of escape. The force axe had vanished with Thorvald, along with all the rest of the meager supplies which had been the officer's original contribution to their joint equipment. Shan had used his knife on brush and small trees, trying to put together some kind of a raft, but he had not been able to discover here any of those vines necessary for binding, and his best efforts had all come to grief when he tried them in a lagoon launching. So far he had achieved no form of raft which would keep him afloat longer than 5 minutes, let alone support 3 of them as far as the next island. Shan pulled listlessly at the framework of his latest try, fully disheartened. He tried not to think of the unescapable fact that the water in the rain tank had sunk to only an inch or so of muddy scum. Last night he had dug in the heart of the interior valley, where the rankness of the vegetation was a promise of moisture, to uncover damp clay and then a brackish ooze, far too little to satisfy both him and the animals. There were surely fish somewhere in the lagoon. Shan wondered if the raw flesh of sea dwellers would supply the water they needed. But lacking net, line, or hooks, how did one fish? Yesterday, using his stunner, he had brought down a bird, to discover the carcass so rank even the wolverines, never dainty eaters, refused to gnaw it. The animals prowled the 2 beaches, and Shan guessed they hunted shell dwellers, for at times they dug energetically in the gravel. Togi was busied in this way now, the sand flowing from under her pumping legs, her claws raking in good earnest. And it was Togi's excavation which brought Shan a first ray of hope. Her excitement was so marked that he believed she was in quest of some worthwhile game, and he moved across to inspect the pit. A patch of brown, which had been skimmed bare by one raking paw, made him shout. Taggi scrambled down slope, going to work beside his mate with an eagerness as open as hers. Shan hovered at the edge of the pit they were rapidly enlarging. The brown patch was larger, disclosing itself as a hump doming up from the gravel. The Terran did not need to run his hands over that rough surface to recognize the nature of the find. This was another shell, such as had come floating in after the storm to form the raw material of their canoe. However, as fast as the wolverines dug, they did not appear to make correspondingly swift headway in uncovering their find, as might reasonably be expected. In fact, a witness could guess that the shell was sinking at a pace only a fraction slower than the burrowers were using to free it. Intrigued by that, Shan went back to the waterline, secured one of the lengths he had been trying to weave into his failures, and returned to use it as a makeshift shovel. Now, with 3 of them at the digging, the brown hump was uncovered, and Shann pried down around its edge, trying to lever it up and over. To his amazement, his tool was caught and held, nearly jerked from his hands. To his retaliating tug, the obstruction below ground gave way, and the Terran sprawled back, the length of wood coming clear to show the other end smashed and splintered as if it had been caught between meshing gears. For the first time he understood that they were dealing not with an empty shell casing, buried by drift under this small beach, but with a shell still inhabited by the Warlockian to whom it was a natural covering, and that inhabitant would fight to continue ownership. A moment's examination of that splintered wood also suggested that the shell's present wearer appeared well able to defend itself. Shann attempted to call off the wolverines, but they were out of control now, digging frantically to get at this new prey, and he knew that if he pulled them away by force, they were apt to turn those punishing claws and snapping jaws on him. It was for their protection that he returned to digging, though he no longer tried to pry up the shell. Taggy leaped on top of that dome, sweeping paws downward to clear its surface, while Togi prowled around its circumference, pausing now and then to send dirt and gravel splattering, but treading wearily as might one alert for a sudden attack. They had the creature almost clear now, though the shell still rested firmly on the ground, and they had no notion of what it might protect. It was smaller, perhaps two-thirds the size of the one which Thorvald had fashioned into a seagoing craft, but it could provide them with transportation to the mainland if Shann was able to repeat the feat of turning it into an outrigger canoe. Taggy joined his mate on the ground, and both wolverines pattered about the dome, obviously baffled. Now and then they assaulted the shell with a testing paw. Claws raked and did not leave any marks but shallow scratches. They could continue that forever, as far as Shann could see, without solving the problem in the least. He sat back on his heels and studied the scene in detail. The excavation holding the shell creature was some 3 yards above the high water mark, with a few more feet separating that from the point where lazy waves now washed the finer sand. Shann watched the slow inward slip of those waves with growing interest. Where their combined efforts had failed to win this odd battle, perhaps the sea itself could now be pressed into service. Shann began his own excavation, a trough to lead from the water line to the pit occupied by the obstinate shell. Of course, the thing living in or under that covering might be only too familiar with salt water, but it had placed its burrow or hiding place above the reach of the waves, and so might be disconcerted by the sudden appearance of water in its bed. However, the scheme was worth trying, and he went to work doggedly, wishing he could make the wolverines understand so they would help him. They still prowled about their captive, scraping at the sand about the shell casing. At least their efforts would keep the half-prisoner occupied and prevent its escape. Shann put another piece of his raft to work as a shovel, throwing up a shower of sand and gravel, while sweat dampened his tattered blouse and was salt and sticky on his arms and face. He finished his trench, one which ran at an angle he hoped would feed water into the pit rapidly once he knocked away the last barrier against the waves. And splashing out into the green water, he did just that. His calculations proved correct. Waves lapped, then flowed in a rapidly thickening stream, puddling out about the shell as the wolverines drew back, snarling. Shann lashed his knife fast to a stout length of sapling, so equipping himself with a spear. He stood with it ready in his hand, not knowing just what to expect. And when the answer to his water attack came, the move was so sudden that in spite of his preparation he was caught gaping. For the shell fairly erupted out of the mess of sand and water. A complete fringe of jointed, clawed brown limbs